It's time for On Point with Julian Phillips.
Welcome to another edition of On Point. The year is 2020 that we're in, and we have achieved so many things, humankind, modern technology. We're going with electric cars, maybe cars that could run on air. We're sending, in fact, we've sent two more people up into space. President Trump now has a space force. There's so many things that are going on, but yet and still we are dealing in 2020 uh, America's original sin, and that is racism. One would think, after all these years and how we've evolved as humans, that we wouldn't have to deal with this, but yet and still, here we are. As a matter of fact, due to Gerald Floyd being murdered by a police officer in Minneapolis, it has evolved into protests in every single state in this country. And even internationally, we've seen protests in Berlin, in England, and hundreds of thousands perhaps in the streets in Paris, France, dealing and looking at this issue and how we as a country handle it. In America, America's original sin deals with race between two groups, primarily black and white. But if you think that racism is a black and white issue, think again. Racism is part of what is called the three words, the human condition. And we've been dealing with this since the beginning of time. And after the Garden of Eden, we have Cain and Abel. They were dealing not necessarily with racism, but they were dealing with the issue of dominance. And from the Christian standpoint of view, God said in the book of Genesis, dominate, have dominion over the earth and multiply. But he wasn't talking about dominion over each other as human beings. But if you believe in the tenets of good and evil, that's what it has evolved into. So therefore, what have we seen throughout the world? You can go to the conflicts between the Pakistanis and the Indians. You can go over into Asia and the conflicts that have happened between the Japanese and the Chinese, the atrocities that were performed there, between the Japanese and the Koreans. You go over into the Mideast and Muslim sects fighting amongst one another. Here also in modern times in the Balkans, the Christians against the Muslims over there, and what they called ethnic cleansing. We have seen this white against white in two world wars. Of course, the Holocaust and millions of Jews and others murdered, gassed, or whatever. So this is not just a black-white problem. And let's not talk about black-on-black crime. And, you find bigots want to talk about that in this country. Well, I just mentioned two world wars, white folks killing each other. We had a war here, the biggest war, the bloodiest war in our country, the Civil War. So that argument by a bigot is shot down very quickly. But we got to understand that this is part of the human condition, the very tenets of good versus evil. But we're focusing on what's going on here and what I've said before, that until the white power structure in this country has the moral courage to admit that the problem of racism is inherently theirs, we're going to continue to have these kinds of problems. And of course, it's boiled down here with police brutality, which of course tears the veil off of this whole issue of racism. Understand, folk, that there are many, many good white people that have taken up the banner of our cause. And you can see it more and more now in the protests and demonstrations around this country. So we can't discount what some black people say, oh yeah, the white devil. Oh no, no, no. This is a human condition. And when we embrace that and understand it, I think we can even better move forward with what we're dealing with here. So in this country right now, 1619 to 2020, there has been an oppression against people of color right now in this country. It is not just a situation where people just hate one another. You can't hate somebody inherently as a human. Not only have to be taught it, but in order to kill somebody, to murder people in the hundreds of thousands and millions, there has to be somebody that puts in your head that the people that you are perpetrating an atrocity against are subhuman. In this country, blacks were made to be subhuman. Thus, back after the Revolutionary War, the Bill of Rights, as we progress through history, they had this thing called the three-fifths compromise, that, blacks were three-fifths of a person. Okay. And that still exists to this day, of course. People hate. But the very root, though, of racism is economics. If it's not about the money, it's about the money. Slavery was about economics, free labor. Blacks built this country and also countries in the Caribbean and South America because of free labor. And they had to do that and paint blacks as subhuman so folks could wrap around in their minds, oh yeah, we can justify this because they're not like us. And that exists to this day. So I wanted to kind of set that up for what we're going to talk about today in terms of Trump, racism, as I've talked about here, and the origins of it, in a very small text. And then, of course, the power of the black vote, which I talked about in another episode, but we're going to focus more on the young black vote and what that means. I want to bring in, once again, my very good friend, Eric Ham. Eric, of course, is a political analyst based in Washington, D.C., and he's also a best-selling author. Eric, welcome back to On Point.
It's good to be with you, Julian. Thanks for having me.
Well, we have our president, President Trump. We witnessed this a few days ago of he or Attorney General William Barr or whomever clearing out peaceful protesters in front of the White House. They say they didn't use tear gas, but a lot of people said they did, also bashing an Australian TV crew, and then paving the way for Trump in this triumphal march to St. John's Episcopal Church, holding up a Bible with gloves on, upside down, reading no scripture, and it amounted to nothing more than a photo op. To me, it seemed very transparent. In your mind, what did you see, the optics, and what did you see the purpose of him doing this?
Well, I think it goes back to the ironies that make up who this president is. We saw this president just before all of this took place in the Rose Garden of the White House talking about, I am your law and order president. And as he is saying this, we see that now Attorney General William Barr has given the order for police officers to tear gas people, shoot people with rubber bullets, to basically pave the way, clear the area so the president can walk over to a church and hold a Bible. And so here we see the president standing in front of a church, holding a Bible, suggesting somehow that he is upholding the tenets of the teachings of Jesus Christ, and somehow suggesting that he is a follower of the Word of God. But yet you just did everything anathema to what that book has talked about. You've used violence to clear people out for no other reason. And so what you've done is you've used the book, you've used Christ's house as a photo op, as a prop, which suggests that everything that you are standing there attempting to uphold has no meaning. And I think many people saw through that. And I think the narrative that the president was trying to accomplish is that, let's be clear. I mean, with the transparency of it this was a nod to his evangelical base. And while that's true, it did nothing to quell the wider tensions, the wider anger that we are seeing growing across this country. I mean, Rome is burning, and the president is actually the one who's leading the way, both with the match and the gasoline.
Well, I got to say, I respectfully, I would only disagree a little bit. I think maybe Mitch McConnell is more behind this than President Trump. And who knows? I mean, even Vladimir Putin, because we understand now, and I found out that he got on the phone with Putin actually before he went out on this walk. And apparently they were talking about a number of things, the G7 summit coming up, as well as dealing with crowds like this. So who knows how much? I mean, I don't want to think for the president and say, but there seems like there may be some suggestion in that. But here's the deal, though. Okay, you're a Christian. I'm a Christian. All right. And I'm trying to wrap my heads around something here where when somebody goes up and just holds up a Bible, doesn't look into it, holding it up upside down, doesn't pray for anybody, even pray for your enemies, pray for an end to the violence, but just sits there, stands there with a stern face with his aides, and then walks off. I mean, how can anybody who considers himself a Christian go along and even wonder, well, why didn't he go one step further? Why didn't he do anything that would say perhaps Jesus might do? Can you answer that question for me, Eric Ham?
No, but I mean, but it takes us back to the book of Matthew, where Jesus is railing against the Pharisees. I mean, that's what it looks like. It looks like this is someone who basically has no faith and is just simply, preening, piety when it just does not exist. And you're right. I mean, he could have, and even if he was not comfortable doing it, he could have had the bishop or the rector from the church actually read from the book, lead people in prayer. But oh yeah, you didn't tell them that you were coming, and you didn't get permission to do it, so they didn't even know that you were coming over there or doing it. So you were just, once again, we see the president standing alone and isolated.
So here what we have is alone and isolated outside of the staff here. But then yet and still, there are people, his base, however large or diminished it may be at this point, still believe in this man, no matter what he does or says. That even for a sane person, I think that would not make any sense. They are still behind it. But look, we can talk about that all day long. Let's move quickly on to, we're going to continue on Trump for a minute here and talk about use of military force. I'm thinking, I could be wrong, but you're taking a notch out of democracy, using military force against your own people. It has been done before. Tell us about that, Eric.
Right. I mean, only other time we saw the police actually engaged was during the 92 riots. And of course, we know how bad that turned out. And clearly they needed help in Southern California because of what was taking place. Just the untold damage, billions of dollars in damage there. But again, people were upset. And of course, the military was only called into that one area. What we're seeing now is President Donald Trump seeking to call the military to basically quash the uprising, the tensions, the demonstrations across the country. And what we are seeing is people are upset. And this is anger, this is frustration that has been boiling not just since the killing of George Floyd, but we can go back to Eric Garner. We can go back to Philando Castile, who was also killed in St. Paul, Minnesota, the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, back in 2016. We can look at Alton Sterling in 2015, who was killed in Louisiana simply for standing outside of a convenience store. I mean, these are not, this was not something that was done in a vacuum. And what America is looking for is they are looking for someone to speak to that anger, to understand and to offer some type of solution that tomorrow will be a better day. And what the president is doing is saying that however you're feeling, whatever you're going through, basically that is your issue, that is your problem, you deal with it. My job, because I am simply here as a law and order president. And when that's all that you have, it's just like the saying, when your only tool is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And so the president simply does not have another gear. He does not have another way. He does not have empathy. He does not have a level of understanding. He cannot speak to the issue of race in America. And so what you see is a president who was simply seeking to stamp out, to put out, and act as if the problems don't exist.
Good point. I just want to move on quickly before we talk about our young Black voters and what that means for the 2020 election. I just want to visit one other thing and kind of put this to rest so people understand what we're talking about here, what we're trying to relay, and what these protesters are trying to relay. I was looking at another network. I won't mention the name of this network, but one of the hosts came on there and talked about, once again, putting it on us, Black on Black crime, and saying, well, Blacks only get upset, when they're being killed by white people or white police, but they don't get upset on their own. In the biggest mind, that's what he'll put up there. What they don't see In fact, there's been dozens of protests by all sorts of people, black people, on black crime. But he was saying, oh, well, blacks are perpetrating crimes against white folks in great numbers. No, it's not true. Eric, talk to me about black on black crime, please. Let it come from your lips.
Sure. Yeah. And I'll give one response to that. The Million Man March. The Million Man March, it dealt with a lot, but one of the biggest issues that it attempted to address was the issues of men dealing with and confronting our families, our own lives, taking control of our lives. Of course, it was about atonement, but also black people, black men atoning for the things that we have also done, looking in the mirror at ourselves. So this is not something that we have not done and we have not been attempting to do since we got to this country. I mean, but we have and then of course, Julian, here's something else that we can go back to Booker T. Washington, this issue of self-responsibility. So this is something that has always been with us. The issue of black on black crime, that's just a straw man. That's just a dog that just won't hunt.
And I just also want to add this real quickly. Black on black crime is no different than white on white crime or Asian on Asian crime. Most crime is committed intra-racially. So why are we being held to a higher standard? And you look at what's going on with the Italians, the mafia, and the Irish, and of course the Jews with Murder Incorporated, and of course the world wars, as I talked about. White people have been killing each other for years. Look at the mass murders and serial killers in this country. Come on. Black people are not unique to crime, as white people are not unique to racism. We've got to really drill this into people. Look, as we go on here and trying to drill this in, the whole purpose of On Point is to get people aware and understand, and also knowing that people of color have more power than they think that we have. And I talked about that, about the black vote in one of our episodes. We have a bunch of young folk out here that can really make a difference to millennials in voting. Bernie Sanders was able to capture these people, but yet and still they didn't come out to vote, and they didn't really support. In this particular election, they are needed. And I heard one woman say of color, well, that nobody's addressing their issues. I don't think that's the case. What is your perspective on the young black vote? Are they there? Will we galvanize them? Will they be a factor in 2020?
Young black voters, much like all young voters, it is a large voting bloc. And if that voting bloc actually came out and exercised that power, they would be a force to be reckoned with, much like the Latino population, even though we know they're not monolithic, just like young black voters, much like black voters are not monolithic voters. But if they come out in numbers, they are certainly a force to deal with. But here's the issue, Julian. If we look at the numbers from 2016, President Donald Trump won the senior citizen vote. He won white suburban women, and that was actually the difference in the race. In fact, if you look at the polling data right now, the reason why Joe Biden is doing so well, the reason why he is putting so much distance between himself and Donald Trump is because he is winning white suburban women and he is winning the senior citizen vote. It's those people that vote no matter what, no matter how. And so that's where Joe Biden needs to be focusing his efforts, because that will be the determination of who wins in November: white suburban women and senior citizens. Now, of course, Barack Obama, and I know many people look at young voters because he did so well with young voters, but frankly, we don't have a candidate like a Barack Obama who's got the swag, who many young people can identify with. And that's not to say that both of these candidates should not go after the young black vote, but I think whoever can win this white suburban women, senior citizens, will be in the Oval Office in 2021.
Absolutely. We could talk about so much more, but Eric Ham, thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to talk about these and other issues in the near future. Thank you so much. I want to end this program to talk about empowerment, and what we can look forward to. Eric mentioned about white suburban women. If you are for removing Donald Trump, if you are for those kinds of things, I mean, look, you can vote for whomever you want. And that's what this country is all about. I don't have any bones about that, although I think there's a lot of serious things here that we need to change. The change of being on point. In Kentucky, the National Organization of Women, white women formed a chain between themselves, the protesters, and the police in solidarity with this cause of Black Lives Matter. Police are taking a knee. Colin Kaepernick, I think you've made your point. Things are changing, but we've got to keep the pressure on. We've got to remain on point and understand who we are, how we can contribute to this change, and the ways that we can do it. I plan to be hammering this issue home as much as I can, me being on point, so you can be on point. Join us next week.